The crystalline displays aboard the Imperial survey vessel, Eternal Vigilance, flickered with unprecedented readings as it decelerated from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. High Commander Zixtal's secondary heart skipped a beat, something it hadn't done in his 3 centuries of exploration. "Impossible," he muttered, his scaled fingers dancing across the holographic interface. "Run the scan again." The ship's quantum eye complied, but the results remained unchanged. The third planet of this unremarkable yellow star was surrounded by a chaotic cloud of artificial satellites, debris, and electromagnetic emissions that defied Imperial classification protocols. In the detention block 17 decks below, Dr. Amanda Hayes felt the subtle shift in the ship's gravity field. After 6 months in captivity, she'd learned to read the ship's movements like a book. The aliens thought they were studying her. In reality, she'd been studying them just as intently. "Looks like we're finally home," she whispered to herself, running her fingers over the small quantum transmitter she painstakingly built from parts stolen during her behavioral observation sessions. The aliens' overconfidence in their superiority had been their first mistake. Their second was assuming she was just another primitive scientist they could examine and discard. Back on the bridge, Zixtal's confusion turned to concern as his crew compiled their initial findings. "High Commander," his science officer reported, mandibles clicking in agitation, "we're detecting over 8,000 artificial satellites, but their arrangement is chaotic. No standardized orbital patterns, no unified communication protocols. Some appear to be deliberately hiding their signatures. Military satellites. Unknown, sir. Some are clearly weapons platforms, but others." The science officer paused, rechecking his data. "Others seem to serve no practical purpose at all. They're just broadcasting entertainment." Zixtal's facial scales shifted in the equivalent of a frown. In all his years of first contact missions, he'd never encountered a species that reached space before establishing the unified planetary government. It went against every known model of civilization development. "What about their weapons technology?" he asked. "That's the most disturbing part, sir. They've mastered nuclear fission and fusion, but haven't developed basic gravitic shields. They've created precision-guided kinetic weapons, but haven't discovered zero-point energy. Their development path is random." In her cell, Amanda finished the final adjustments to her transmitter. She knew the aliens would be watching Earth now, trying to make sense of humanity's seemingly chaotic technological evolution. They wouldn't understand, couldn't understand. That chaos was humanity's greatest strength. The transmitter hummed to life, its quantum signature masked by the ship's own communications array, a trick she'd learned by watching their engineers during her scheduled observations. The signal would be weak, but it would reach Earth. And more importantly, it would reach the quantum beacon network she'd helped design before her abduction, the one that even she hadn't known worked until she saw the aliens' reaction to it. Zixtal was about to order a closer approach to Earth when his tactical officer suddenly straightened, all 4 eyes widening in alarm. "Sir, we're detecting a signal. It's coming from inside the ship. Source unknown, but..." The tactical officer's scales paled. "Sir, it's using quantum frequencies we thought were theoretically impossible for this sector's development level." In her cell, Amanda smiled as klaxons began to blare throughout the ship. She'd warned them, during one of their interrogation sessions, that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their military might. It was their ability to adapt, to think in ways that no other species could predict. They hadn't believed her. They were about to learn just how expensive that mistake would be. As the Eternal Vigilance turned its sensors toward Earth for a deeper scan, thousands of seemingly dormant satellites suddenly shifted their orientation. Humanity had been waiting, watching, preparing. First contact wouldn't go quite the way the Galactic Empire had planned. The game was about to begin, and for the first time in its 50,000-year history, the Empire wasn't holding all the cards. Captain James Morrison stood in the dimly lit control room of Area 51, watching thermal imaging displays track 5 heat signatures moving through the facility's unsecured sector. The aliens thought they were being clever, using their advanced stealth technology to infiltrate what appeared to be a vulnerable military installation. They had no idea they were walking into the most elaborate trap ever constructed. "Status on the quantum field?" he asked, his voice steady despite the tension crackling through the room. Lieutenant Sarah Rodriguez glanced up from her station, her fingers dancing across 3 keyboards simultaneously. "Dr. Hayes's beacon is still transmitting. They're following the signal exactly as predicted. Guess they really want their test subject back." Morrison allowed himself a grim smile. 6 months ago, when Hayes had been taken, they'd been helpless. Now, thanks to her ingenious quantum beacon technology and the aliens' own arrogance, they were about to turn the tables. 3 levels below, the Imperial infiltration team moved with practiced precision through the seemingly primitive facility. Their active camouflage systems, perfected over millennia of covert operations, rendered them virtually invisible to known detection methods. "This is almost disappointing," Sub-Commander Krillix vocalized through their neural link. "Their security systems are centuries behind our technology. No wonder they lost their scientists so easily." The team's tech specialist, Vixna, wasn't so sure. Something about the facility's layout bothered her. "The electromagnetic signatures are irregular, almost as if." Her realization came too late. The corridor's temperature suddenly dropped 50 degrees, and their camouflage systems began to malfunction as frost formed on their supposedly impervious armor. "Impossible," Krellix hissed as their active camouflage flickered and died. "This is primitive temperature manipulation." Morrison's voice echoed through the corridor, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Fun fact about Earth technology. Sometimes the old ways work best. Welcome to our house." The aliens found themselves visible, their advanced armor systems compromised by simple cold. But that was just the beginning. The corridor's lights flared to full brightness, revealing walls lined with what the Imperial team initially dismissed as primitive projectile weapons. "Those are electromagnetic pulse generators," Vixna realized with horror. "But they're arranged in a pattern that." The guns fired simultaneously, not with bullets but with precisely calibrated electromagnetic pulses. Each pulse alone was harmless, but together they created a resonance pattern that turned the aliens' own neural links into feedback loops. Morrison watched on the monitors as 4 of the 5 infiltrators collapsed, their neural systems overloaded by what his engineers had dubbed the dubstep attack. The 5th, showing impressive resilience, managed to maintain consciousness and raise their energy weapon. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, if you would do the honors." Sarah grinned and pressed a single key. The floor beneath the remaining alien rippled. Smart metal, another of Hayes's innovations, and wrapped around the infiltrator like quicksilver. "Quantum beacon signal is spiking," another technician reported. "Looks like their ship took the bait." Above the facility, the Imperial vessel Eternal Vigilance decoded what they thought was a distress signal from their infiltration team. Instead, they received Dr. Hayes's prepared message. Lesson 1 in Human Warfare. We don't play fair. In the control room, Morrison opened a channel to the Joint Chiefs. Phase 1 complete. We have 5 Imperial prisoners and their tech. Tell Dr. Hayes her plan worked perfectly. He paused, looking at the tactical display where thousands of satellites were silently repositioning themselves, and informed the Russians and Chinese that they're clear to begin Phase 2. "Let's show our visitors why humans never developed unified planetary defenses. We were too busy planning how to fight each other." As alerts began blaring aboard the Eternal Vigilance, High Commander Zixtal realized with growing dread that his empire had made a catastrophic error. They had assumed humanity's divided nature was a weakness. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The hunt was on, and the hunters had become the hunted. Lieutenant Colonel Kate Davidson watched the holographic display at NORAD's upgraded command center as thousands of dots representing orbital debris suddenly transformed into a synchronized dance of potential destruction. 6 months of preparation were about to pay off. "Confirm status on all KillSat platforms," she ordered, her voice carrying across the hushed command floor. "Chinese debris field is in position," reported Major Chen from the International Liaison Station. "Russians have their dead satellites ready. EU Space Agency reports their grid is green." Kate allowed herself a small smile. Who would have thought that humanity's greatest weapon would be their tendency to litter in space? Decades of abandoned satellites, rocket stages, and space junk were about to become the galaxy's most elaborate minefield. Above Earth, the Eternal Vigilance deployed its standard conquest protocol. 11 destroyer-class vessels emerged from hyperspace, positioning themselves above Earth's major cities. Their energy shields, impervious to any known weapon in this sector, hummed with anticipation. High Commander Zixtal, still reeling from the loss of his infiltration team, watched the deployment with growing unease. Status of the human defense systems. "Minimal activity, sir," his tactical officer reported. "Their primitive missiles remain in their silos. Their aircraft are mobilizing, but they pose no threat to our shields." "And the debris field?" "Standard space garbage, sir. Their orbit is deteriorating as expected when they lost their primitive tracking systems." But Zixtal had learned not to underestimate these humans. Something about the debris field's movement pattern seemed almost intentional. In her cell aboard the Eternal Vigilance, Dr. Amanda Hayes felt the subtle vibrations of multiple ships entering formation. Right on schedule, she pulled out her final creation, a quantum oscillator built from parts she'd been collecting for months. The aliens thought they'd been thorough in their searches, but they'd never considered that she'd hide components in plain sight. Disguised as religious icons, they were too culturally sensitive to confiscate. Back at NORAD, Kate received the signal she'd been waiting for. A single pulse, encoded in the quantum frequency that only Hayes' technology could detect. "All stations, execute Operation Newton's Cradle," Kate commanded. "Let's show them why you don't bring energy shields to a kinetic fight." Across Earth's orbit, thousands of pieces of debris suddenly fired maneuvering thrusters, tiny, cold gas systems that had remained dormant for months. The Empire's sensors, calibrated to detect energy weapons and nuclear launches, completely missed the subtle shifts in trajectory. The first impact seemed harmless, a defunct weather satellite glancing off a destroyer's shields. But it was followed by another and another, each piece of debris precisely calculated to hit at exactly the right angle, building a resonance pattern in the shields. "Sir," the tactical officer's scales had turned pale. "The debris, it's not random. They're using our shield harmonics against us." Zixtal watched in horror as his supposedly impenetrable ships were systematically pummeled by acceleration-enhanced space junk. Each impact weakened the shields exponentially, the kinetic energy transferring through the resonating force fields in ways their designers had never anticipated. "Impossible," he whispered. "The mathematical precision required to orchestrate this." In her cell, Hayes activated her oscillator. The quantum frequency matched perfectly with the resonance pattern being created by the debris impacts. Across the fleet, shield generators began to overload. At NORAD, Kate watched as the first destroyer's shields collapsed under the onslaught. Phase 2. Initiate. All platforms cleared hot. The dead satellites suddenly came alive, revealing hidden railgun arrays. They opened fire with depleted uranium rounds, precisely targeted at the now vulnerable ship's propulsion systems. "Message from the Russian Space Force," Major Chen announced with a grin. "They say, and I quote, 'In space, Newton is the deadliest soldier.' The Imperial fleet, for the first time in its history, found itself being systematically dismantled by what they had dismissed as garbage. Their mighty energy shields, designed to repel the most advanced weapons in the galaxy, were useless against the simple physics of kinetic impacts. The chess game had begun, and humanity had just captured their first pieces. But as Kate watched the tactical display, she knew this was just the opening move. The real battle was about to begin. Marine Staff Sergeant Mike O'Brien crouched behind a fallen column in the ruins of downtown Seattle, his modified M4 carbine held close. Around him, his squad of 12 Marines carried a bizarre array of weaponry that would have given any military inspector an aneurysm. Soviet-era RPGs retrofitted with quantum guidance systems, electromagnetic pulse grenades cobbled together from microwave ovens, and even primitive black powder weapons. Looking real pretty for a bunch of space rednecks, he muttered into his comm, watching an Imperial dropship land 2 blocks away. Their advanced armor gleaming in the morning sun, a squad of alien warriors emerged, weapons raised. "Remember, folks," O'Brien transmitted to his team, "these boys have never heard of bullets. Their fancy shields stop energy weapons, not good old-fashioned lead. Semper Fi." In the Imperial War Council chamber aboard their last surviving capital ship, the tactical advisors watched in growing horror as their ground forces encountered something they'd never seen in 50,000 years of warfare: complete tactical chaos. Impossible. General Krastvol slammed his appendage against the holographic display. "These primitives are using combustion-propelled metal projectiles, chemical explosives, their own electromagnetic radiation against us. This violates every convention of civilized warfare." His aide, younger and more adaptable, studied the footage with growing concern. "Sir, they're not just using primitive weapons. They're combining them with our own technology they've captured. Look at this." The display showed an Imperial warrior, his personal shield easily deflecting energy bolts from a captured Imperial weapon. He strode forward confidently, until a primitive projectile, guided by stolen quantum targeting systems, struck him from behind at precisely the resonance frequency of his shields. Back in Seattle, O'Brien's squad executed their plan with practiced precision. 2 Marines fired salvaged alien energy weapons at the Imperial squad's front, forcing them to angle their shields forward. Exactly as planned, their shields' power cycled to the front, just as O'Brien's team launched their hybridized RPGs from multiple directions. Like shooting fish in a barrel, O'Brien grinned as the quantum-guided warheads found their marks. The alien shields, calibrated to stop energy weapons, might as well have been tissue paper against the kinetic impact of shake charges. But the real surprise came when the surviving aliens tried to call for reinforcements. Their quantum communications, supposedly unblockable, met a wall of interference from thousands of modified microwave ovens, TV transmitters, and ham radios, all broadcasting on frequencies that should have been useless, but somehow created a perfect jamming field. "Sir," the aide's voice rose in panic as he showed the general another tactical feed. They're using their own civilian infrastructure as weapons. Those primitive power transmission lines. They're purposely overloading them to create electromagnetic pulses that disable our systems." General Krastvol watched in disbelief as humans demonstrated warfare techniques that defied Imperial military doctrine. Their tactics weren't just unpredictable, they were practically insane. Who would think to use their own city's power grid as a weapon? Who would combine space-age targeting systems with chemical explosives? Who would even think to try? O'Brien's voice crackled over the civilian emergency broadcast system, hijacked to transmit on all frequencies. "Welcome to Earth, where we never stopped improving the old ways while learning the new ones. You boys brought ray guns to a gunfight, and that's just embarrassing." In the War Council chamber, the tactical AI responsible for Imperial military strategy for over a millennium suddenly crashed, unable to process the sheer variety of combat techniques being employed simultaneously. These humans weren't fighting like a primitive species learning to use advanced technology. They were fighting like they'd spent their entire history preparing for this moment, accumulating every possible way to wage war rather than discarding the old for the new. As O'Brien's squad secured their sector, using everything from cutting-edge quantum tech to improvised pipe bombs, the Empire began to realize a terrifying truth. They hadn't found a primitive species learning to fight. They'd found combat artists who had turned warfare itself into an ever-evolving form of creative expression. And they were just getting started. Dr. Thomas Reynolds sat in his makeshift office at the Pentagon's new Xenopsychological Warfare Division, studying footage of Imperial commanders reacting to Earth's latest psychological operation. After 3 weeks of constant combat, the military psychiatrist had discovered something extraordinary about their alien adversaries. They had no concept of deception in warfare. "Play it again," he instructed his AI assistant. "Focus on the Imperial commander's reaction to Operation Trojan Horse." The holographic display showed an Imperial dreadnought accepting surrender from what appeared to be a damaged International Space Station. The moment the station was tractored into their landing bay, hundreds of supposedly dead human soldiers in vacuum suits burst from hidden compartments, their primitive projectile weapons wreaking havoc in the pressurized environment. "Fascinating," Reynolds muttered, noting the alien commander's complete mental breakdown. They literally cannot process the concept of a false surrender. Their entire society is built on absolute truth. Lying in warfare never evolved in their culture. A knock at his door interrupted his analysis. Colonel Jessica Winters entered, carrying fresh combat data. "Doc, your theory about their psychological vulnerabilities. It's working better than we ever imagined." Reynolds pulled up the latest battle maps. Across the globe, Imperial forces were falling into carefully crafted psychological traps. In North Africa, they'd discovered empty cities filled with holographic civilians, wasting precious time and resources protecting non-existent humans. In the Pacific, phantom fleets of fishing boats had led Imperial destroyers into massive underwater minefields. "They're like perfect poker players who've never heard of bluffing," Reynolds explained, watching another Imperial command center fall to human deception. "They've spent 50,000 years fighting enemies who follow the same rigid rules of engagement. Then they met us." On the main screen, footage showed Imperial troops encountering their first dummy tank battalion. Inflatable decoys that had been standard military practice since World War I. The aliens wasted their advanced weaponry on rubber targets while real tanks struck from unexpected directions. "Sir," his AI assistant interrupted, "you need to see this. The Empire just issued new combat protocols to their forces." The translated document appeared on screen, and Reynolds couldn't help but laugh. The Empire was trying to codify and categorize human deception techniques, treating them like a scientific problem that could be solved with enough analysis. They still didn't understand that human deception wasn't a set of tactics. It was a way of thinking. "They're trying to create a flowchart for detecting human tricks," Colonel Winters observed, shaking her head. "But we're already 10 steps ahead." Reynolds nodded, pulling up his latest psychological warfare proposal. "Operation Hall of Mirrors. We let them think they've figured out our deception patterns, then we use their own analysis against them. When they think we're lying, we tell the truth. When they think we're being honest, we strike from the shadows." Across Earth, the results of Reynolds' psychological warfare campaign were becoming clear. Imperial commanders, trained to fight with perfect honor and absolute tactical clarity, were experiencing mass psychological breakdowns. Their rigid military doctrine couldn't handle an enemy that turned warfare itself into a mind game. In orbit, an Imperial command carrier intercepted what appeared to be a critical human transmission about evacuating the United Nations. Following their new anti-deception protocols, they assumed it was a trap and ignored it, only to miss the actual evacuation of Earth's political leadership to a hardened bunker complex. "The beauty of it," Reynolds explained to his team during the daily briefing, "is that we're not just deceiving them, we're teaching them to deceive themselves. Every time they think they've figured us out, that certainty becomes a weapon we can use against them." Colonel Winters studied the latest psychological impact reports. "They're starting to see deception everywhere, even where it doesn't exist. Their entire command structure is paranoid." Reynolds nodded, watching another Imperial fleet fall for an elaborate feint that would have been obvious to any human commander. They spent 50 millennia perfecting the art of warfare, but they never learned its most important lesson. The mind is the greatest battlefield of all. And on that battlefield, humanity wasn't just winning. They were rewriting the rules of the game itself. Major Diana Cooper stood before the remains of an Imperial tactical AI core, its crystalline structure still smoking from the paradox that had crashed it. Around her, the captured Imperial Command Center buzzed with activity as engineers and programmers worked to understand how they'd managed to break what was essentially a 50,000-year-old supercomputer. "Run it again," she ordered, watching the holographic replay. "Show me exactly what we did that made it crash." The simulation displayed her infamous Cooper maneuver, a tactical sequence that had started with World War II pincer movements, morphed into modern cyber warfare, and concluded with drone swarms mimicking Cold War nuclear launch patterns. The AI had frozen trying to predict her next move, its logic circuits unable to process the deliberate chaos of her strategy. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Rick Martinez called from his station, "we've decoded more of its tactical databases. You're not going to believe this." Cooper moved to his screen, her eyes widening as she read. The Imperial Tactical AI had been developed to predict and counter every known form of warfare in the galaxy. Its neural networks contained perfect counters to millions of combat strategies, but all of them followed logical, predictable patterns of development. "They evolve like chess players," Cooper mused, "always thinking 10 moves ahead. But we're playing Calvin Ball." Martinez finished with a grin, referencing the old comic strip where the rules changed every minute. "The AI can't predict our next move because we don't even know what it'll be until we do it." In the main command center of the last Imperial capital ship, the situation was reaching critical levels. Every attempt to engage their tactical AI resulted in immediate system crashes. Without its guidance, their commanders were forced to think for themselves, something their rigid military hierarchy had never prepared them for. "Impossible." Fleet Admiral Vix Thor raged, watching another battle group fall to seemingly random human tactics. "They're using orbital debris as kinetic weapons, then switching to electromagnetic warfare, then reverting to primitive explosives, then combining all three. There's no pattern." His tactical officer, younger and more adaptable, was starting to understand. "Sir, I believe that is their pattern. They don't follow a single doctrine. Each commander creates their own strategies, combining centuries of different warfare techniques at will." Back in the captured command center, Cooper's team made another breakthrough. The Imperial Tactical AI's base code revealed something extraordinary. It had been designed to learn from its enemies, incorporating their strategies into its database. But humanity's chaotic approach wasn't just resistant to analysis. It was actively corrupting the AI's learning algorithms. "Every time it tries to learn from us," Cooper explained to her superiors via quantum link, "we show it something that contradicts what it just learned. It's like trying to write a rulebook for a game where the rules are, there are no rules." The Empire's response to this crisis proved to be their undoing. They attempted to program their AI to understand human chaos by creating complex algorithms to predict unpredictability. The result was a cascade of logic failures that spread through their linked combat networks like a virus. Cooper watched with satisfaction as Imperial ships began losing control of their automated systems. "They tried to make order from chaos," she explained to her team. "Instead, we taught their machines to embrace chaos itself." In a desperate attempt to counter human unpredictability, the Empire's remaining forces tried to adapt. But their attempts to mimic human tactical chaos were like watching someone try to plant spontaneity. It missed the entire point. "The beauty of it," Cooper told her team as they prepared their next impossible strategy, "is that we're not just defeating their technology. We're challenging their entire understanding of warfare. They see combat as a science. We see it as an art form." As her new battle plan was transmitted to Earth's combined forces, a bizarre combination of Stone Age siege tactics, digital warfare, and quantum physics, Cooper couldn't help but smile. The Empire had spent 50 millennia perfecting the rules of war, only to meet a species that saw rules as merely suggestions. And somewhere in the depths of space, the Empire's vast network of tactical AIs began to learn the most dangerous lesson of all. Sometimes, the only winning move is to break every rule in the book. Colonel Jack Harper had never expected to find himself teaching guerrilla warfare to a 7-foot-tall crystalline alien, but here he was, in the captured Imperial frigate's hold, converted into an impromptu training facility. He watched as former Imperial slave species attempted to grasp the concept of improvised explosive devices. No, he corrected the crystalline being, whose name was unpronounceable in human languages. You're thinking like an Imperial. Stop trying to make it perfect. Sometimes the best weapon is the one your enemy doesn't think is a weapon at all. The alien, whom the Marines had nicknamed Crystal, tilted its geometrically perfect head. But the explosive ratio is suboptimal. The blast pattern would be irregular. Exactly. Harper grinned. That's what makes it beautiful. The Imperials will run every scan they know looking for perfect explosives. They'll never think to look for something this crude. Dr. Amanda Hayes, finally free from her cell, and now Earth's leading expert on Imperial psychology, watched the training session from an observation deck. They're starting to understand, she noted to her colleague, Dr. Reynolds. Slowly, but they're getting there. The ship's hold had become a bizarre military academy. Former Imperial slaves from a dozen species were learning Earth's entire history of warfare, from stick-and-stone ambush tactics to modern hybrid warfare. Each species brought their own unique abilities to the table, abilities the Empire had suppressed in favor of standardization. Look at that. Hayes pointed to a group of gaseous beings practicing with simple slings. The Empire forced them to use solid weapons when their natural form can literally become a living chemical weapon. They never even thought about it until we showed them how Earth's indigenous peoples used their environment as a weapon. In another corner, aquatic aliens were learning human naval warfare tactics, their natural understanding of three-dimensional combat finally unleashed. Their Imperial commanders had forced them to fight on land, never realizing their true potential. The Empire's worst nightmare was coming true. Humanity wasn't just refusing to be conquered, they were teaching others to resist. Each species brought its own natural advantages to human tactical doctrine, creating hybrid warfare styles that had never existed before. Sir, a lieutenant burst into the observation deck. You need to see this. We're getting reports from across Imperial space. The tactical display lit up with rebellion markers. Slave species across 1,000 worlds were rising up, using tactics they'd learned from intercepted Earth broadcasts. The Empire's standardized responses, designed to counter conventional rebellions, were useless against these hybrid insurgencies. They're using everything, the lieutenant reported with awe. Gaseous species are conducting chemical warfare their own way. Crystalline beings are turning their natural structures into primitive but effective weapons. Even the photonic species are adapting human guerrilla tactics to light-based combat. Harper watched as Crystal successfully jury-rigged an Imperial energy cell into a crude but effective bomb. The Empire made a fundamental mistake, he explained to his alien students. They thought advancing technology meant leaving the old ways behind. They forgot that sometimes the oldest weapons are the most effective, especially when combined with new techniques. In Imperial High Command, reports were reaching panic levels. Their subject species weren't just revolting. They were revolting in ways that made no tactical sense, yet were horrifyingly effective. Each rebellion was different, unpredictable, combining primitive and advanced techniques in ways that defied Imperial military doctrine. This is how liberty spreads, Hayes observed, watching the tactical display light up with more rebellion markers. Not through superior technology or perfect tactics, but through the simple human idea that rules are made to be broken. Harper gathered his interstellar students for their next lesson. Behind him, a holographic display showed the entire history of human warfare, from sticks and stones to quantum weapons. Remember, he told them, the Empire tried to make you all the same, but your greatest strength is your difference. Each of you has natural abilities they forced you to suppress. Today, we're going to learn how to use them. The Empire had feared human weapons and tactics, but they were about to learn that humanity's most powerful weapon was an idea, that the best way to win isn't to play by the rules, it's to write your own. The Imperial High Council chamber hadn't seen such chaos in 50 millennia. Holographic displays showed thousands of worlds in revolt, each rebellion using tactics that defied Imperial military doctrine. The Supreme Commander, Zalthul, watched in horror as the perfect order of the Empire crumbled before what his analysts were now calling the human contagion. "We must contain this," he declared to the assembled commanders. "Quarantine the Earth sector before." "It's too late," interrupted Dr. Amanda Hayes, her hologram materializing in the center of their chamber. The Empire's best encryption, broken by teenagers with quantum computers built from gaming consoles. Humanity isn't a species you can contain. We're an idea. In orbit around Earth, the combined human-alien fleet presented a sight that would have been comical if it wasn't so terrifying. Crystalline ships flew alongside retrofitted Russian destroyers. Gaseous beings piloted vessels that were more organic than mechanical. Every species had adapted human tactics to their own natural abilities, creating a fighting force that defied any attempt at conventional military analysis. Final transmission going out to all Imperial forces. Colonel Jack Harper reported from the fleet's flagship, a hybrid vessel that combined Imperial tech with human ingenuity. "Let's see if they're ready to talk." The message that broadcast across Imperial space was simple. Footage of every Empire defeat, every successful rebellion, every moment where human chaos had trumped Imperial order. But the truly devastating part was the classified Imperial analysis that followed. Species assessment. Humanity. Terra/Earth. Classification. Extinction level threat. Warning. This species achieved nuclear fission before planetary unification. They developed over 10,000 distinct ways of warfare before reaching their moon. Their tactical doctrines actively resist analysis and appear designed to corrupt military AI systems. Most critical finding. They teach others to think like them. Supreme Commander Zalthul watched his empire unravel in real time. On Rigel Prime, crystalline beings were using primitive projectile weapons, their natural structures amplifying the kinetic impact. In the Vega sector, gaseous species had turned entire nebulae into weapon systems using tactics learned from Earth's naval warfare. "You never understood what makes us dangerous," Hayes continued, her hologram walking through the Imperial tactical displays. "It's not our weapons or our technology. It's our ability to imagine new ways to fight, and our desire to share that knowledge." The Imperial High Council received reports of their own forces beginning to adapt human tactics. Young officers, exposed to Earth's military history, were questioning the rigid doctrine that had defined Imperial warfare for 50 millennia. "Here's your choice," Harper's voice joined the transmission. "Option 1. Retreat. Abandon your empire, your slave worlds, your perfect order. Option 2. Face in galaxy where every species you've ever subjugated knows how to fight like humans." In the council chamber, the youngest member of the Imperial High Command stood up. "Supreme Commander, I studied their history. Do you know why humans developed so many ways to wage war? Because they spent their entire history fighting themselves. Every weapon, every tactic, every strategy was tested and refined against other humans. We're not facing a species that learned to fight against aliens. We're facing one that perfected warfare against itself." The implications hit home. The Empire had spent 50 millennia imposing order on the galaxy, creating a perfect system of predictable warfare. Humanity had spent its history in glorious, chaotic innovation, treating warfare as an art form that constantly evolved. "Your final warning," Hayes concluded, her hologram addressing the assembled Imperial leadership. "Earth is now under the protection of the Human Defense Initiative. Any aggressive action against our world will be met with weapons and tactics you haven't even imagined yet. And trust me, we can imagine quite a lot. As the Empire's fastest ships began their retreat from Earth space, they transmitted a warning to all approaching vessels. Sector closed by Imperial decree. Class X contamination risk. Species capable of corrupting standard military doctrine. Primary quarantine protocol. Do note ENJG. They do not follow the rules of warfare. They teach others to break them. And on Earth, humanity looked to the stars not with fear, but with anticipation. They had taught the galaxy that chaos could defeat order, that imagination could triumph over doctrine, and that the greatest weapon of all was the ability to think differently. The Empire's retreat marked the beginning of a new age, one where the galaxy would learn that sometimes the best way to win wasn't to follow the rules, but to rewrite them entirely.